Let's go ahead and introduce our speaker for this final session here. We have Joel Harrison. Joel, as you see here on the screen, is the founder of ElevateHub.ca, and it's a Impact News, British Columbia Impact News and job listing site. He's a social impact podcaster and marketing consultant for nonprofits and social enterprises. He's passionate about building marketing that has impact on people or the planet that also brings awareness and trust to your organization. Thanks so much for being here with us, Joel. And just a reminder, if you have questions, to drop them into the Q&A section of your panel here. It'll be right underneath your chat next to your session chat there. And with that, I pass the baton to you, Joel.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nicole. I'm so happy that everyone is here. I'm excited to talk about this with you and dive right in. This is a presentation I've done before. There we go. Looks like we're back. Sorry about that. So this is a presentation I've done before in the past, and I'm trying to condense it to fit into this timeline. So go through a lot today, so feel free to take screenshots or things like that if you need to gather things quickly. But yeah, let's get started. So today we're going to be talking about how to create 10 times the content without more work. Sort of. There's going to be a little bit more work involved, but we want to try and be as efficient as possible. So my name's Joel Harrison, social entrepreneur, marketing consultant, and impact podcaster. Feel free to contact me. I love when people reach out after these talks. And if you want slides or have questions afterwards, feel free to reach out, please. So I know this happens to a lot of people. You sit down at that blank screen to write that article, and you're faced with this. The daunting white screen here. Maybe you hit that writer's block and you get so overwhelmed, you decide, oh, maybe I'll push it off to another day. But then, of course, you work in a nonprofit, so this is what your calendar looks like. It's just so hard to create content sometimes. So what we're going to talk about are 9 of the most efficient ways that you can create content. And first, we need to set a little bit of groundwork, just because content is not always equal. And some content is promotional, and it might look like a call to action to donate or asking for participation in something. This type of content is very promotional, and we don't want to just create a bunch more of it. We want to be specific and strategic with the type of content that we do create more of. So we want to create content that actually has impact on its own. And an example of this would be something like this 21-day challenge that someone can sign up for on this website, where the actual impact, the actual content itself has value. It has education. It has impact. It changes people. This is the type of content that we want to create more of. We don't want to just create more promotions on social media or emails. We want to create content that has value, because that's what's going to capture attention, but also build trust and relationship with people. So if you're questioning what type of content to create, you can ask yourself, if my nonprofit didn't exist, would this content still work to advance the same mission?
Real quick, are you sharing your screen?
I am.
Not seeing it.
All right, let's click that again. Are we
There
sharing
it is.
now?
Yes, we see it.
All right. So some of that would not have made sense. Just quickly going back, some content is impactful, and this is the one I was showing as an example, where this is a piece of content that someone can sign up for to get this 21-day challenge, and it has impact on its own. And so we want to create more of that type of content. So if you can ask yourself, if my nonprofit didn't exist, would this content still work to advance the same mission? And I think this is a really good litmus test to see, is it promotional, or is it valuable, and is it directed towards advancing that mission? Because there's content you can create where it's actually going to impact people on its own, not just drive them to your services or programs. So we're going to talk about these 9 methods. And the first method is start with the core content. And this is a really key one. We're going to spend a little bit of extra time on this one, because this is one of the methods that large organizations, small organizations, entrepreneurs, nonprofits, they use to really create huge amounts of content and be everywhere without actually having to create that much. So what we're going to talk about is taking one piece of content and actually turning it into 20, 30 different pieces of content on its own. The example I'm going to show you is with a video piece of content, because it's one of the ones that you can create the most amount of content from, but you can do it with other types of content as well. But it needs to be a substantial piece of content. And so a video is a great place to start, because you can actually take that video and you cut it up. You could cut it up into 3 different sections. So let's say you're having a conversation with someone on that video. Maybe it's an interview or a conversation with your executive director or something like that. You can cut that up into 3 different segments, or however many different questions or segments you had in that video. And now you have bite-sized pieces of video content that you can share on social media channels. And so your first video could be distributed through your website, through YouTube, through social media channels as an entire piece. But now you actually have smaller pieces, and those ones will have different headlines, be more specific and bite-sized so that people can consume them. And so already off the bat, we've turned one video into several different pieces of content. The other thing you can do while you're creating content is actually take pictures. So whether you're doing a video or an audio podcast, I've done this in the past with some of the podcasts that I've done, is you just take pictures of the process of creating that podcast. And now you have more things to share and give people that insider perspective, that behind the scenes kind of perspective of the inner workings of your organization, or how you go about creating that content. Now you can also take that video, and there's either programs or you can do it manually, but that's a lot of work, to transcribe the video and actually turn it into a text format that you can put as an article on your website or a blog post. And this is a great way to create content that has some searchability, because Google will be able to see all of that text on your website without actually having to write the whole thing. And so this is a really good format for people who are also more inclined to speaking and talking than writing. So you actually just speak and talk into the video. When you transcribe it, now you have an article that you can post in your emails, on your website, and share it out from there. The other thing you could do is, if you have someone on the team who is a writer, you could actually take that video and summarize it, or an idea from it, into an article. And so you can take a lot of the content from that piece of that video and turn it into like a tangential piece of content that dives into one area of that video. You can also copy. Now you've got quotes in text format that you can copy and turn those into content for your emails. You can put that into tweets or share it onto social media through images. So you can take those quotes from that transcript and turn them into social media images as well, which is obviously great for Instagram and other platforms like that that are very visual. The other thing you could do with video here is turn the audio into a podcast format. So if you're doing a series of videos, maybe you have a couple that are coming out and it's a 3-part series, or maybe it's an ongoing interview series that you're doing with your videos, you can turn that into an audio podcast. So that way you can share it on iTunes, you can share it on Spotify, you can share it on Google Podcasts, and get more distribution for the same piece of content. And this, again, these are things that people use, organizations use on a regular basis, that want to show up everywhere without creating a ton of content from scratch. And then obviously you can just share that video through email as well. And then, so your task for this method, we're going to go through a task at the end of each method, is to decide what type of core content you could create and then repurpose into different pieces. So sometimes you can start with video, you could start with an audio podcast, and you can even just start with long form articles. So if you have someone on your team who is a good writer, or maybe your executive director is writing articles, you can turn those articles into other pieces of content following some of these principles here. All right, method number 2. This is actually the reverse of the first one. So we can actually compile content that was in a smaller format into larger pieces of content. So some examples here, you can compile some of your social media posts that are all related around one type of topic, or there's some way to kind of correlate them together, and turn them into an article. You can actually take screenshots of those social media posts and kind of feed them together and talk about it as one cohesive thing, or just take the ideas of the images and kind of compile them and not have to reference the social media posts. You can gather up quotes, facts, data that you've used. Maybe those were in social media, maybe they were in different platforms, your emails or reports, or some on your website. And those are really good ways to pull data into a larger piece of content that could be an article, or it could be a video that you talk about those different data points. You could take highlights from several different articles if you have some that are related to each other, and you could take some of those highlights and actually compile them into one article and be able to create another piece without actually writing an entire new article, because you're taking a lot of that substance from previous things that you've done. So your task for this one, write down the micro content that you could compile together into something bigger. All right, so we're going to keep blitzing through these because there's a lot of great methods here. And if you utilize some of these, or even one of them, it can be a great way to get your foot started with creating content or creating more content, and just keep on progressing and keep on improving your processes. So method 3 here is find content you didn't know you already created. I absolutely love this one. So one of the things that I've noticed over time is that we're often creating content that we didn't know we could share and reuse in other places. And one of the best places to look is in your emails, because what we're doing is we're often either sharing emails internally, or we're sharing emails externally with donors or corporate partners or program members or volunteers. All of these emails have a ton of information in it that we could actually share into other pieces of content. Maybe it's something on social media. Maybe it's an article that you create, but the information, the education, and the value that you're providing through answering questions in emails can also be pulled out and turned into articles or other pieces of content. So look to other things you have, like phone calls. Maybe you're explaining the same thing over and over again in phone calls. Or your annual reports. I hope all of you are creating annual reports and using some of that content already, but you could pull a lot of that out or reformat it into different platforms. Training manuals. I know some nonprofits don't get to that stage of things and have very substantial training manuals, but if you do and you're fortunate enough, there's probably information in there you could share as well. Speeches or talks that your team gives or your executive directors has been involved in. So your task here is to take stock of all the assets you could possibly use for content. So looking at these different categories, take a few of them in mind and see what you can come up with. All right, method number 4, partner with other organizations. This one is really important too, because now you don't have to create the content yourself. You can have other people create that content. So be interviewed. This is one of the greatest ways to do it, because anyone that is creating some kind of content needs substance. They need information, they need education, they need connection. And if you can provide that message or that information for them in their content, it's a really easy way to create a partnership, to expose your organization to their audience, or to expose your initiatives or mission to another group of people. So looking for places that are podcasts or blogs to be featured in, to be interviewed, can be a really great way to create more content without having to think about it all and plan it all and do it all yourself and move forward that way. The other thing you could do is actually ask your corporate partners for content that you could feature on your channels. So you could ask them for quotes, you could ask them for images. This is a way that you can actually show not only the partnership, but you can show your partners or your donors in a really positive light, and they might actually be inclined to reciprocate and do that for you as well. So ask your corporate partners for content. Maybe they're even willing to do an article for you and create a featured article for your blog or for your newsletter or emails. This is a great way to get more content. So your task with this one, research podcasts, events, or aligned organizations that are creating content that could feature you. All right, method number 5, guest content. So this is very similar. We actually just talked about the fact that we can ask our corporate partners for content, but there's a lot of other ways we can talk about guest content. So it's often very hard to create content, especially smaller nonprofits. You've got one person on the marketing team, or maybe that marketing person also does 3 other things. Creating content at the same time can be very difficult. So if there's any way we can get other people involved, then we're going to be so much better off. And here are some different ways that you can look at guest content and other people that can contribute either articles or ideas or photos, quotes, that sort of thing. So you can ask your other team members, of course. So they don't have to be in a communications role. They don't have to be in a leadership role. You can actually ask anyone throughout your organization to talk about their experience and their perspective. They could document their process. If they're at an event, for them to take pictures. Obviously, people aren't going to events at the moment, but once we do go back to having events, having pictures from a variety of different perspectives can be really valuable. Your volunteers, donors, and participants, so these are people kind of just outside that core group of team members that you have. Feel free to ask them as well. There's a lot of donors and volunteers that are totally thrilled with the mission that you're on. They're excited to be with you. They want to lift you up and share their experience of it. So just ask. I would recommend that you have some sort of guideline on what you'd like them to contribute. Maybe it's an article. You can ask them for a quick article. Maybe it's a quote. Maybe it's a quick video kind of comment or testimonial, that sort of thing. And then students and new grads, I've had success with this as well in organizations, looking for people with either an English major or a communications background or something that's related to your industry. Maybe it's environmentally related, and looking for those students who are eager to build their portfolio, to build their network, and see if they want to contribute. You can reach out on LinkedIn, you can talk to people in universities or at your events, and just put it out there, because being able to, again, capture more voices and more content from other sources is incredibly valuable, and then you don't have to create it all yourself. So again, I would suggest create a description of the type of article or piece of content you're looking to have, and then start asking. This is an example from one organization in British Columbia here, Nature Trust of British Columbia, where they had a volunteer who went on a 1,400 kilometer, 27-day journey through the rivers on a canoe trip, walking, hiking, canoeing. And it was an experience that they had that they could then share as a blog post on this article. And this is solely written in the perspective of that participant, that volunteer. And it was a great way to show the inner workings, the background, the behind the scenes, the community of what happens with your organization through content. And sometimes that outside perspective is 10 times better than the inside perspective. So yeah, look for these opportunities. Method number 6. This one is, we can talk about flipping the angles in a couple of different ways. And one of the ways is actually physically flipping the angles. So a lot of people are focused on Instagram or Facebook, and we're talking about photos all the time. Think about how you could take those photos differently. We're not all professional photographers, but one of the things that you can do is think about it from different angles. So if your standard photo taking position is standing up and taking a picture straight forward, you can try to crouch down, try to get on top of a table or on top of a chair. Like physically take a different angle, zoom in close to something. If you're taking a picture of your team lunch, take a super close zoom in photo of your lunch, take a super wide photo of everyone on the team. Showing those different angles can be a great way to create variety in your content, and then be also able to create that content so that it lasts a little bit longer as opposed to just sharing one picture. So here's a quick example of a forest where you could take a picture straight on of that tree, or you could take it straight up. It looks very different, and these could be 2 separate posts on your social media channels with slightly different comments, of course. The point of view can also be flipped. So if you're talking about a program or an event or something that you're promoting or some type of education, you could talk about it from your organization's perspective, write an article, write a social media post. You could also talk about it from your executive director's perspective. They could actually share a quote or write the article themselves, or you could share from a volunteer perspective. And so we can think about these different angles. We could talk about the exact same thing, but with different perspectives, and it creates variety, it creates more content, it creates more context for people to learn about what you're working on. And then the topic as well can be changed. If you could look at the same problem or the same situation from a positive or negative view, from a proactive or a reactive view. I'm just going to quickly skip past that. So your task here is find a previous piece of content you've done and try to brainstorm how you could have flipped the angle, or how you still could flip the angle. So maybe you have a photo of something on your Instagram feed, and you could think about, hey, how else could I take that photo to share a different aspect of it or a different perspective? All right, and then we'll curate content. So obviously you can just, instead of creating the content yourself, you can curate it, by which you can actually just go out and find other pieces of content. This is really effective for email newsletters and e-magazines, but always just make sure to show appreciation for the work, especially if you're using images on social media. So your task here, find an image, article, or story from an organization you're closely associated with, something that's related, and ask if you can share it. If it's just a link to an article, you don't need to ask for permission, but if it's something more substantial, the content of something or an image, please do ask. Method number 8, be curious and ask. So again, going back to not creating the content yourself, instead of creating content, you could actually just ask questions. This is a very simple way to get people engaged, to get content out there, and you could do it in so many different formats: Instagram stories, in posts, polls, surveys, images, emails. There's so many different ways you can ask questions, but it's a really good way to create engagement without having to create the content yourself. And now if you receive the answers, you actually have even more content that you can use. So you can take this strategy and list off 5 simple questions that you can ask your audience to elicit that engagement, and not have to actually create the content yourself, but start a conversation. Here's just a quick example of the Tofino Tourism Awareness Organization here on Instagram. They're actually really good at asking questions, and they did something unique, which I don't see a lot of people doing, but they asked the question. They were talking about over-tourism and whether people think it's a problem in Tofino, which is in British Columbia here. 96% yes, 4% no. But the unique thing that they did is they actually they took a screenshot of the responses, of the stats from the back end of Instagram, and shared that as a post. So not only are they asking the question, but they're taking the results and they're talking about it afterwards to create even more content. And this is, again, a really easy way to create content without having to think about and come up with education and answers and a long form piece. And then the last one here, method number 9, reshare and republish. One of my favorites, just because we're talking about not creating again and again and again if you don't have to, especially since so many of your new followers and subscribers don't actually see the old things that you've done. Maybe they're articles, maybe they're old annual reports with data in them, maybe they're social media posts from last year. There's so much content there that new followers and new donors or volunteers, they don't get to see. So if you can bring that up by resharing it and republishing it, then it's all the better. So resharing is just the act of simply taking something that's still applicable and useful and just sharing it again. So maybe that's through Twitter, through LinkedIn, through Instagram, and just going at it again. Or republishing, which is actually updating the content slightly. So maybe you had some old data in there that needs to be updated to something fresh, and then we can actually move forward. So go through each of your channels for the past few years and note some pieces that are timeless and could be reshared. So people want you to make more great content. Please go out and do it. Here are some ways to multiply it, and I hope you take something useful out of this and share. Thank you very much. My name's Joel.
Thank you so much, Joel. You shared some great gems there, like repurposing content using things you already do, emails, phone calls, common things you say, explain, describe. That's all content right there. And Melanie also says she loves the idea of the 21-day challenge. So some really great information here. We've got a couple minutes to do some Q&A, and if you haven't already, head on over to the Q&A tab. It's next to your chat session, and you can see all the questions that have been asked so far and vote for your favorite ones. So why don't we kick off with this first question here from Drew. Is it advisable to share the same nugget more than once through the same medium, or would you lose interest of the subscribers? And if yes, how long should one wait before resharing the same bit of content?
Yeah, it definitely depends on the platform. So Twitter, because the feed goes by so quickly and people are inundated with tons of content, you can go at that content multiple times, even within a month, especially if it's a substantial piece like a video or an article or podcast episode. Obviously, you want to change the language on the tweet. Maybe one time you share a headline, one time you share a quote, but it could link to the same thing. Again, so it's about flipping the angles. If you're resharing something, how can you modify it, change it, show something just slightly different? So if you're talking about the same event or same thing on Instagram, take a separate photo. Don't try to use the same photo the next time. So again, it's the Twitter, you can go a little bit faster on how quickly you reshare. If it's something like Instagram, maybe you want to wait a little bit longer before you really reshare the exact same photo. I have seen people do it, but if you do it, maybe that's something that you could do like a year later, not too quickly.
Got it. Got it. Let's move to this question from Elena. Elena would like to know, what are your feelings on user-generated content?
I love user-generated content because it shows so many different perspectives, just like we talked about. So users, volunteers, donors, we could talk about it in different ways, but that outside perspective can be so unique and so much emotion or heartfelt or participatory information that you would never get from someone inside the organization. So if you can get it, and asking questions is one of the great ways to do that on a simple level. Interviewing people or getting them to submit guest content is a little bit more in-depth way to do that.
Excellent. And let's just get to one more question here. I thank you all for your questions. Let's see, there's 2 more questions there. Joel, I'll let you take your pick.
Academic research reports and simple summaries with commentary. I almost always go for simple content, always. Unless you're specifically targeting a specific group of academic people, doctors, physicians, researchers in universities, and that's your core, I would very highly recommend going with this as simple as possible. Summaries, like you said, commentary is really good because we want it to be able to be digestible quickly. Nowadays, you need things that are easy to consume, quick to understand. And so your job is to take complexity and turn it into simplicity. And that's what I think is really valuable nowadays.
Thank you, Joel. We'll end there. Again, really appreciate all your insights, and to everyone for your questions. It's now time to head on over to the stage where we are going to wrap up. So Joel, again, thanks for being here with us.
Thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate it.
See you on the stage. Bye.
Bye.